Part 3 of Dog Ghosts or Apparitions of Dogs by Elliott O'Donnell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. "This is the house," Mr. Baldwin panted, pulling up with the greatest difficulty, the horse evincing obvious antipathy to the iron gate. "And these are the keys. I'm afraid you must go in alone, as I dare not leave the animal even for a minute." "Oh, all right," I said. "I don't mind, now that the ghost, or whatever you like to call it, has gone. I'm myself again." I jumped down, and threading my way along the bramble-entangled path, reached the front door. On opening it, I hesitated. The big, old-fashioned hall, with the great frowning staircase leading to the gallery overhead, the many open doors showing naught but bare deserted boards within, the grim passages, all moonlit and peopled only with queer flickering shadows, suggested much that was terrifying. I fancied I heard noises like stealthy footsteps moving from room to room and tiptoeing along the passages and down the staircase. Once my heart almost stopped beating as I saw what at first I took to be a white face peering at me from a far recess, but which I eventually discovered was only a daub of whitewash. And once again my hair all but rose on end when one of the doors at which I was looking swung open and something came forth. Oh, the horror of that moment! As long as I live I shall never forget it. The something was a cat, just a rather lean but otherwise material black Tom. Yet in the state my nerves were then, it created almost as much horror as if it had been a ghost. Of course it was the figure of the walking man that was the cause of all this nervousness. Had it not appeared to me, I should doubtless have entered the house with the utmost sang-froid, my mind set on nothing but the condition of the walls, drains, etc. As it was, I held back, and it was only after a severe mental struggle I summoned up the courage to leave the doorway and explore. Cautiously, very cautiously, with my heart in my mouth, I moved from room to room, halting every now and then in dreadful suspense as the wind, soughing through across the open land behind the house, blew down the chimney and set the window frames jarring. At the commencement of one of the passages I was immeasurably startled to see a dark shape poke forward and then spring hurriedly back, and was so frightened that I dared not advance to see what it was. Moment after moment sped by, and I still stood there, the cold sweat oozing out all over me, and my eyes fixed in hideous expectation on the blank wall. What was it? What was hiding there? Would it spring out at me if I went to see? At last, urged on by a fascination I found impossible to resist, I crept down the passage, my heart throbbing painfully, and my whole being overcome with the most sickly anticipations. As I drew nearer to the spot, it was as much as I could do to breathe, and my respiration came in quick jerks and gasps. 6, 5, 4, 2 feet, and I was at the dreaded angle. Another step, taken after the most prodigious battle, and nothing sprang out at me. I was confronted only with a large piece of paper that had come loose from the wall and flapped backwards and forwards each time the breeze from without rustled past it. The reaction from such an agony of suspense was so great that I leaned against the wall and laughed till I cried. A noise from somewhere away in the basement calling me to myself, I went downstairs and investigated. Again a shock, this time more sudden, more acute. Pressed against the window-pane of one of the front reception rooms was the face of a man, with corpse-like cheeks and pale, malevolent eyes. I was petrified, every drop of my blood was congealed. My tongue glued to my mouth, my arms hung helpless. I stood in the doorway and stared at it. This went on for what seemed to me an eternity. Then came a revelation. The face was not that of a ghost, but of Mr. Baldwin, who, getting alarmed at my long absence, had come to look for me. We left the premises together. All the way back to the town I thought, should I or should I not take the house? Seen as I had seen it, it was a ghoulish-looking place, as weird as a Paris catacomb, but then daylight makes all the difference. Viewed in the sunshine, it would be just like any other house, plain bricks and mortar. I liked the situation. It was just far enough away from a town to enable me to escape all the smoke and traffic, and near enough to make shopping easy. The only obstacles were the shadows, the strange, enigmatical shadows I had seen in the hall and passages, and the figure of the walker. Dare I take a house that knew such visitors? At first I said no, and then yes. Something, I could not tell what, urged me to say yes. I felt that a very grave issue was at stake, that a great wrong connected in some manner with the mysterious figure awaited righting, and that the hand of fate pointed at me as the one and only person who could do it. "Are you sure the house isn't haunted?" I demanded, as we slowly rolled away from the iron gate, and I leaned back in my seat to light my pipe. "Haunted?" Mr. Baldwin scoffed. "Why, I thought you didn't believe in ghosts, laughed at them." "No more I do believe in them," I retorted, "but I have children, and we know how imaginative children are." "I can't undertake to stop their imaginations." "No, but you can tell me whether anyone else has imagined anything there. Imagination is sometimes very infectious." "As far as I know, then, no. Leastways, I have not heard tell of it." "Who was the last tenant?" "Mr. Jeremiah Dance." "Why did he leave?" "How do I know? Got tired of being there, I suppose." "How long was he there?" "Nearly 3 years." "Where is he now?" "That's more than I can say. Why do you wish to know?" "Why?" I repeated. "Because it is more satisfactory to me to hear about the house from some one who has lived in it. Has he left no address?" "Not that I know of, and it's more than 2 years since he was here." "What? The house has been empty all that time?" 2 years is not very long. Houses, even town houses, are frequently unoccupied for longer than that. I think you'll like it." I did not speak again till the drive was over and we drew up outside the landlord's house. I then said, "Let me have an agreement. I've made up my mind to take it. 3 years and the option to stay on." That was just like me. Whatever I did on the spur of the moment, a mode of procedure that often led me into difficulties. A month later, and my wife, children, servants, and I were all ensconced in the Crow's Nest. That was in the beginning of October. Well, the month passed by, and November was fairly in before anything remarkable happened. It then came about in this fashion. Jenny, my eldest child, a self-willed and rather bad-tempered girl of about 12, evading the vigilance of her mother, who had forbidden her to go out as she had a cold, ran to the gate one evening to see if I was anywhere in sight. Though barely 5 o'clock, the moon was high in the sky, and the shadows of the big trees had already commenced their gambols along the roadside. Jenny clambered up the gate as children do, and peering over, suddenly espied what she took to be me, striding towards the house at a swinging pace, and followed by 2 poodles. "Papa," she cried, "how cute of you! Only to think of you bringing home 2 doggies! Oh, papa, naughty papa! What will mum say?" And climbing over into the lane, at imminent danger to life and limb, she tore frantically towards the figure. To her dismay, however, it was not me, but a stranger, with a horribly white face and big glassy eyes, which he turned down at her and stared. She was so frightened that she fainted, and some 10 minutes later I found her lying out there on the road. From the description she gave me of the man and dogs, I felt quite certain they were the figures I had seen, though I pretended the man was a tramp and assured her she would never see him again. A week passed, and I was beginning to hope nothing would happen, when one of the servants gave notice to leave. At first she would not say why she did not like the house, but when pressed made the following statement: "It's haunted, Mrs. B. I can put up with mice and beetles, but not with ghosts. I've had a queer sensation as if water was falling down my spine ever since I've been here, but never saw anything till last night. I was then in the kitchen getting ready to go to bed. Jane and Emma had already gone up, and I was preparing to follow them, when all of a sudden I heard footsteps, quick and heavy, across the gravel and approach the window. 'The boss,' says I to myself, 'maybe he's forgot the key and can't get in at the front door.' Well, I went to the window and was about to throw it open when I got an awful shock. Pressed against the glass, looking in at me, was a face, not the boss's face, not the face of anyone living, but a horrid white thing with a drooping mouth and wide open glassy eyes that had no more expression in them than a pig. As sure as I'm standing here, Mrs. B., it was the face of a corpse, the face of a man that had died no natural death. And by its side, standing on their hind legs and staring in at me too, were 2 dogs, both poodles, also no living things, but dead, horribly dead. Well, they stared at me, all 3 of them, for perhaps a minute, certainly not less, and then vanished. That's why I'm leaving, Mrs. B. My heart was never overstrong. I always suffered with palpitations, and if I saw those heads again, it would kill me." After this my wife spoke to me seriously. "Jack," she said, "are you sure there's nothing in it? I don't think Mary would leave us without a good cause, and the description of what she saw tallies exactly with the figure that frightened Jenny. Jenny assures me she never said a word about it to the servants. They can't both have imagined it." I did not know what to say. My conscience pricked me. Without a doubt I ought to have told my wife of my own experience in the lane, and have consulted her before taking the house. Supposing she, or any of the children, should die of fright, it would be my fault. I should never forgive myself. "You've something on your mind. What is it?" my wife demanded. I hesitated a moment or two, and then told her. The next quarter of an hour was one I do not care to recollect, but when it was over, and she had had her say, it was decided I should make inquiries and see if there was any possible way of getting rid of the ghosts. With this end in view I drove to the town, and after several fruitless efforts was at length introduced to a Mrs. Marsden, clerk of one of the banks, who, in reply to my questions, said, "Well, Mr. B., it's just this way. I do know something, only in a small place like this one has to be so extra careful what one says. Some years ago a Mr. Jeremiah Dance occupied the Crow's Nest. He came here apparently a total stranger, and though often in the town, was only seen in the company of one person, his landlord, Mr. Baldwin, with whom, if local gossip is to be relied on, he appeared to be on terms of the greatest familiarity. Indeed, they were seldom apart, walked about the lanes arm in arm, visited each other's houses on alternate evenings, called each other Teddy and Leslie. This state of things continued for nearly 3 years, and then people suddenly began to comment on the fact that Mr. Dance had gone, or at least was no longer visible. An errand boy, returning back to town late one evening, swore to being passed on the way by a trap containing Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Dance, who were speaking in very loud voices, just as if they were having a violent altercation. On reaching that part of the road where the trees are thickest overhead, the lad overtook them, or rather Mr. Baldwin, preparing to mount into the trap. Mr. Dance was nowhere to be seen. and from that day to this nothing has ever been heard of him. As none of his friends or relations came forward to raise inquiries, and all his bills were paid, several of them by Mr. Baldwin, no one took the matter up. Mr. Baldwin pooh-poohed the errand boy's story, and declared that, on the night in question, he had been alone in an altogether different part of the county, and knew nothing whatever of Mr. Dance's movements. Further than that, he had recently announced his intention of leaving the Crow's Nest before the expiration of the 3 years' lease. He had not the remotest idea where he was. He claimed the furniture in payment of the rent due to him. "Did the matter end there?" I asked. "In one sense of the word, yes. In another, no. Within a few weeks of Dance's disappearance, rumours got afloat that his ghost had been seen on the road, just where, you may say, you saw it. As a matter of fact, I've seen it myself, and so have crowds of other people." "Has anyone ever spoken to it?" "Yes, and it has vanished at once. I went there one night with the purpose of laying it, but on its appearing suddenly, I confess I was so startled that I not only forgot what I had rehearsed to say, but ran home without uttering as much as a word." "And what are your deductions of the case?" "The same as every one else's," Mr. Marsden whispered, "only, like every one else, I dare not say." "Had Mr. Dance any dogs?" "Yes, 2 poodles, of which, much to Mr. Baldwin's annoyance every one noticed this, he used to make the most ridiculous fuss." I observed, "that settles it. Ghosts, and to think I never believed in them before. Well, I am going to try." "Try what?" Mr. Marsden said, a note of alarm in his voice. "Try laying it. I have an idea I may succeed." "I wish you luck, then. May I come with you?" "Thanks, no," I rejoined. "I would rather go there alone." I said this in a well-lighted room, with the hum of a crowded thoroughfare in my ears. 20 minutes later, when I had left all that behind, and was fast approaching the darkest part of an exceptionally dark road, I wished I had not. At the very spot where I had previously seen the figures, I saw them now. They suddenly appeared by my side, and though I was going at a great rate, for the horse took fright, they kept easy pace with me. Twice I essayed to speak to them, but could not ejaculate a syllable through sheer horror, and it was only by nerving myself to the utmost, and forcing my eyes away from them, that I was able to stick to my seat and hold on to the reins. On and on we dashed, until trees, road, sky, universe were obliterated in one blinding whirlwind that got up my nostrils, choked my ears, and deadened me to everything, save the all-terrorizing instinctive knowledge that the figures by my side were still there, stalking along as quietly and leisurely as if the horse had been going at a snail's pace. At last, to my intense relief, for never had the ride seemed longer, I reached the Crow's Nest, and as I hurriedly dismounted from the trap, the figures shot past me and vanished. Once inside the house, and in the bosom of my family, where all was light and laughter, courage returned, and I upbraided myself bitterly for this cowardice. I confessed to my wife, and she insisted on accompanying me the following afternoon, at twilight, to the spot where the ghost appeared to originate. To our intense dismay, we had not been there more than 3 or 4 minutes before Dora, our youngest girl, a pretty, sweet-tempered child of 8, came running up to us with a telegram, which one of the servants had asked her to give us. My wife, snatching it from her and reading it, was about to scold her severely, when she suddenly paused, and clutching hold of the child with one hand, pointed hysterically at something on one side of her with the other. I looked, and Dora looked, and we both saw, standing erect and staring at us, the spare figure of a man, with a ghastly white face and dull, lifeless eyes, clad in a Panama hat, Albert coat, and small patent leather boots, Beside him were two glossy, abnormally glossy, poodles. I tried to speak, but as before was too frightened to articulate a sound, and my wife was in the same plight. With Dora, however, it was otherwise, and she electrified us by going up to the figure and exclaiming, "Who are you? You must feel very ill to look so white. Tell me your name." The figure made no reply, but gliding slowly forward, moved up to a large isolated oak, and pointing with the index finger of its left hand at the trunk of the tree, seemingly sank into the earth and vanished from view. For some seconds everyone was silent, and then my wife exclaimed, "Jack, I shouldn't wonder if Dora hasn't been the means of solving the mystery. Examine the tree closely." I did so. The tree was hollow, and inside it were 3 skeletons. Here followed an extract from a local paper. "Sensational discovery in a wood near Marytown. Whilst exploring in a wood near Marytown the other evening, a party of the name of B discovered 3 skeletons, a human being and 2 dogs, in the trunk of an oak. From the remnant of clothes still adhering to the human remains, the latter were proved to be those of an individual known as Mr. Jeremiah Dance, whose strange disappearance from the Crow's Nest, the house he rented in the neighbourhood, some 2 years ago, was the occasion of much comment. On closer examination, extraordinary to relate, the remains have been proved to be those of a woman, and from certain abrasions on the skull there is little doubt she met with a violent end." A second extract, taken from the same paper, runs thus: "Suicide at Marytown. Late last night, Percy Baldwin, the man who is under arrest on suspicion of having caused the death of the unknown woman, whose skeleton was found on Monday in the trunk of a tree, committed suicide by hanging himself with his suspenders to the ceiling of his cell. Pinned on his coat was a slip of paper bearing these words: 'She was my wife. I loved her. She took to drink. I parted from her. She became a dog worshipper. I killed her and her dogs.'" Phantasms of living dogs. I could quote innumerable cases of people who have either seen or heard the spirits of dead dogs. However, as space does not permit of this, I proceed to the oft-raised question, do animals as well as people project themselves? My reply is yes. According to my experience, they do. Some friends of mine have a big tabby that has frequently been seen in 2 places at the same time. For example, it has been observed by several people to be sitting on a chair in the dining room, and at the same moment it has been seen by 2 or more other persons extended at full length before the kitchen fire, the latter figure proving to be its immaterial, or what some designate its astral body, which vanishes the instant an attempt is made to touch it. The only explanation of this phenomenon seems to me to lie in projection, the cat possessing the faculty of separating, in this instance unconsciously, its spiritual from its physical body, the former travelling anywhere, regardless of space, time, and material obstacles. I have often had experiences similar to this with a friend's dog. I have been seated in a room, either reading or writing, and on looking up have distinctly seen the dog lying on the carpet in front of me. A few minutes later, a scraping at the door or window, both of which have been shut all the while, and on my rising to see what was there, I have discovered the dog outside. Had I not been so positive I had seen the dog on the ground in front of me, I might have thought it was an hallucination. But hallucinations are never so vivid nor so lasting. Moreover, other people have had similar experiences with the same dog. And why not? Dogs, on the whole, are every whit as reasoning and reflective as the bulk of human beings. And how much nobler! Compare for a moment the dogs you know, no matter whether mastiffs, retrievers, dachshunds, poodles, or even Pekingese, with your acquaintances, with the people you see everywhere around you, false, greedy, spiteful, scandal-loving women, money-grubbing attorneys, lying, swindling tradesmen, vulgar parvenus, finicky curates, brutal toughs, spoilt, cruel children, hypocrites of both sexes. Compare them carefully, and the comparison is entirely in favor of the dog. And if the creating power, or powers, has favored these wholly selfish and degenerate human beings with spirits, and has conferred on certain of them the faculty of projecting those spirits, can one imagine for one moment that similar gifts have been denied to dogs, their superiors in every respect? Pshaw! Out upon it! To think so would mean to think the unthinkable, to attribute to God qualities of partiality, injustice, and whimsicality, which would render him little, if anything, better than a James II of England or a Louis XV of France. Besides, from my own experience and the experiences of those with whom I have been brought in contact, I can safely affirm that there are phantasms, and therefore spirits, of both living and dead dogs in just the same proportion as there are phantasms, and therefore spirits, of both living and dead human beings. Psychic properties of dogs. Some, not all, dogs, like cats, possess the psychic property of scenting the advent of death, and they indicate their fear of it by the most dismal howling. In my opinion, there is very little doubt that dogs actually see some kind of phantasm that, knowing when death is about to take place, visits the house of the doomed and stands beside his or her couch. I have had this phantasm described to me by those who declare they have seen it, as a very tall, hooded figure, clad in a dark, loose, flowing costume, its face never discernible. It would, of course, be foolish to say that a dog howling in a house is invariably the sign of death. There are many other and obvious causes which produce something of a similar effect. But I think one may be pretty well assured that, when the howling is accompanied by unmistakable signs of terror, then someone, either in the house at the time or connected with someone in the house, will shortly die. Dogs in haunted houses. When I investigate a haunted house, I generally take a dog with me, because experience has taught me that a dog seldom fails to give notice in some way or other, either by whining or growling or crouching shivering at one's feet, or springing on one's lap and trying to bury its head in one's coat, of the proximity of a ghost. I had a dog with me when ghost hunting, not so very long ago, in a well-known haunted house in Gloucestershire. The dog, my only companion, and I sat on the staircase leading from the hall to the first floor. Just about 2:00, the dog gave a loud growl. I put my hand out and found it was shivering from head to foot. Almost directly afterwards I heard the loud clatter of fire irons from somewhere away in the basement, a door banged, and then something, or someone, began to ascend the stairs. Up, up, up came the footsteps, until I could see, first of all a bluish light, then the top of a head, then a face, white and luminous, staring up at me. A few more steps, and the whole thing was disclosed to view. It was the figure of a girl of about 16, with a shock head of red hair, on which was stuck, all awry, a dirty little old-fashioned servant's cap. She was clad in a cotton dress, soiled and bedraggled, and had on her feet a pair of elastic-sided boots that looked as if they would fall to pieces each step she took. But it was her face that riveted my attention most. It was startlingly white, and full of an expression of the most hopeless misery. The eyes, wide open and glassy, were turned direct on mine. I was too appalled either to stir or utter a sound. The phantasm came right up to where I stood, paused for a second, and then slowly went on, up, 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 until a sudden bend in the staircase hid it from view. For some seconds there was a continuation of the footsteps. Then there came a loud splash from somewhere outside and below, and then silence, sepulchral and omnipotent. I did not wait to see if anything further would happen. I fled, and Dick, my dog friend, who was apparently even more frightened than I, fled with me. We arrived home, panic-stricken. Over and over again, on similar occasions, I have had a dog with me, and the same thing has occurred. The dog has made some noise indicative of great fear, remaining in a state of stupor during the actual presence of the apparition. Psychic propensities of dogs compared with those of cats. Though dogs are, perhaps, rather more alarmed at the unknown than cats, I do not think they have a keener sense of its proximity. Still, for the very reason that they show greater, more unmistakable indications of fear, they make surer psychic barometers. The psychic faculty of scent in dogs would seem to be more limited than that in cats. For whereas cats cannot only detect the advent and presence of pleasant and unpleasant phantoms by their smells, few dogs can do more than detect the approach of death. Dogs make friends nearly, if not quite, as readily with cruel and brutal people as with kind ones, simply because they cannot, so easily as cats, distinguish by their scent the unpleasant types of spirits cruel and brutal people attract. In all probability they are not even aware of the presence of such spirits. It would seem, on the face of it, that since dogs are, on the whole, of a gentler disposition than cats, that is to say, not quite so cruel and savage, the phantasms of dogs would be less likely to be earthbound than those of cats. But then one must take into consideration the other qualities of the two animals, and when these are put in the balance, one may find little to choose, morally, between the cat and the dog. Anyhow, after making allowance for the fact that many more cats die unnatural deaths than dogs, there would seem to be small numerical difference in their hauntings, cases of dog ghosts appearing to be just as common as cases of cat ghosts. End of Part 3.